Shop furniture! You know you could use some, whether it's a tool stand, a work table, or even just a stool to sit on. I'm going to show you how I like to build mine using construction grade 2x4s and half-lap joinery. Hi, my name's Jason and I'm a woodworker who builds custom windows by day, and by night I make bandsaw boxes like these. I've recently partnered up with Woodworking for Beginners. They're a really great Facebook group made up of woodworkers from all skill levels and backgrounds. And now they've started this YouTube channel that will feature all sorts of topics geared specifically toward beginning woodworkers. So make sure you click subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And while you're at it, check out the Facebook group at the link below. And if you want to see more of what I'm doing, you can find me at jmawoodstudio.com. Alright, so I'm fortunate enough to be working in a fairly large shop with a variety of different tools. And a lot of those tools really benefit from having their own table or stand. And my favorite method for building those items is using half-laps. So what's a half-lap, you ask? Well, I just happen to have one right here, or rather this is actually half of a half-lap. You can see here I've cut away exactly 1/2 of the thickness of this board, and the length of my cut is equal to the width of my mating board, which I also have right here. And you can see when they're joined up together here, they create for a really nice seamless joint that when properly made and glued together can make for really strong furniture that lasts for decades. And here's just a few of the pieces around the shop that I've built using half-laps. So here's a stand that I built for this mortiser. You can see down below I've got a little shelf to hold various items, and then underneath there I've got some casters, and so this thing rolls around really nice on those casters. And so here's a stand that I built for my spindle sander, and you can see I built this one so that I had room to fit other tools underneath there. So here we have an outfeed table that I built to go behind the table saw down here in another area of the shop. One of the great things about this table is that it also just works as a general work table. If you can see down below here, I mounted leveling feet underneath this one, and that just comes in really handy for getting the top of this table level with the saw. So the tools I'm going to be using for this build are a table saw with a regular combination blade and a dado stack. You don't absolutely have to have a dado stack for this, but it's really going to make life a lot easier. I'll also be using an 18 gauge brad nailer that's hooked up to an air compressor. And then I'll also use some clamps and some squares and even a drill and impact driver. As for materials, well, like I said, I'm going to be building these out of 2x4s, and you're really going to want to be using kiln-dried 2x4s. How do you know they're kiln-dried? Well, it should say so right on the placard that lists the price and the dimensions, but then it should also be stamped right on the board here. You can see this one says KDHT, and that stands for kiln dried heat treated, and that's the type of lumber that I'm always using if I'm using 2x4s. Of course, it's also really going to help to get the straightest 2x4s you can, and I know how hard that can be. I actually lucked out when I got these at Lowe's just the other day. Just a few minutes of digging around, I found some boards that were really pretty straight. You know, if you've got the tools and the know-how to joint and flatten these boards, well, then more power to you. But just in the sake of keeping this as simple as I can, I'm not going to be jointing or planing any of these, and so it really helps to get straight, flat boards. For my top, I like to use 3/4 inch plywood. You could probably get away with 1/2 inch in a lot of cases. I certainly wouldn't go any thinner than that. And then I'm also going to be using some glue and wood screws. As for dimensions, well, that's really entirely up to you and whatever kind of furniture it is that you need for your shop. The great thing about this system is it's easily customized to whatever it is your needs are. As for me, well, I'm going to be building a small stand, a stand for my butt. I could really just use a stool for my carving station over there, and so that's what I'm going to be building for this demonstration. But like I said, this can be customized to build a stand or a table of any size. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've cut my pieces down to a more manageable size here. I know the lengths that I want my boards to be, and I've just kind of rough cut these about an inch or two longer than I ultimately want them to be. If that doesn't make sense right now, it will in just a little bit. Because I like to trim the edges of my boards. I like to get these corners cut off of here, these rounded corners, and get nice, crisp, square corners on these. So I'm going to be ripping these on my table saw, and cutting these down to a more manageable size is going to help out a lot with that. And so this is one area where you do want to be a little bit careful ripping these construction grade 2x4s on your table saw. You really don't want boards that are going to be twisting around a whole lot on you, because if these boards start twisting on you, if they're not laying really nice and flat and stable on your table saw, well, that can create a binding situation up against the blade, and that can create kind of a dangerous kickback situation. And so that's something you definitely want to avoid. If your boards aren't lying nice and flat on your table saw, well, then you're either going to want to flatten those boards, or you're going to want to go back to the hardware store and get some straighter boards. Okay, so I've trimmed the edges of my board. I've cut a 1/4 inch off of each side, and so now I've got nice crisp corners here. And each of these boards are exactly 3 inches wide. And so now I need to cut them to length. And the way I like to do that is right here at my table saw. I'm going to start by cutting my legs, and I want this stand to be 25 inches tall. And I need to subtract from that 3/4 of an inch for the thickness of the plywood that I'm going to be using for the top. So I need these legs to be 24 1/4 inches long. Now I'm going to add to that measurement 1 inch. And the reason I'm adding that 1 inch is because of this spacer block that I'm going to be attaching to my fence. This block is exactly 1 inch thick, and I just keep this around for this exact purpose. On the top here, I've got a hole drilled, and I'm going to be attaching it to the fence using this fence clamp. These are really super handy clamps to have around. I've got 4 of these. I'm using them for all sorts of things. And so I'm going to be attaching this to my fence back here, and just clamping that down. And then I've got my fence set to 25 1/4. And so the reason I'm using that is because you don't want to ever have your workpiece up against the fence as you're making a cross cut. That just creates for a really dangerous kickback situation, and you never want to do that. You want to have this spacer block here so that by the time I come up to my blade, I've got space here now between my piece and my fence, and that's just really the way you always want to be making cuts like this. And so yeah, I've got this at 1 inch thick, and all I have to do is add 1 inch to all my measurements, and I will get everything cut exactly to the same length.
All right, and here's a little demo of how I like to do cross cuts at the table saw. You can see there I went a little bit past my block. I went past the block and a little bit closer to the fence. And I made a cut on one side, and now I'm going to bump up against my block and cut the other side. And the reason I like doing it this way is not only do I want these boards cut to a very specific length, but I also want both ends nice and square. And this is just the best tool I have in the shop for doing that. This is just kind of a trick that I picked up building custom windows. You certainly don't have to do it this way, but that's the way I like to do it.
All right, so my legs are cut to length, and now I'm going to cut my stretchers. And so this might be a good time to point out that we're actually only going to be building two opposing sides of this stand using half-lap joinery, and then we're going to be connecting those two halves using wood screws. If that doesn't make any sense right now, trust me, it will. Just go ahead and watch to the end. And so which sides you want to build using half laps is entirely up to you. Personally, I like to go with the shorter side, as it just makes things a little bit easier. And so the shorter side of this stand that I'm building is going to be 18 inches. And so I'm going to cut my stretchers here at the full 18 inches. All right, so my legs are all cut, and so are my stretchers. I've got 4 legs and 4 stretchers. That's 2 upper and 2 lower stretchers, and everything is cut to length. And so now it's time to swap out this blade for a dado stack so that we can start cutting some joinery. All right, I've got my dado stack in here, and now it's time to get everything set up for these half laps. And so the setup here really consists of 2 things. It's going to be the blade height, and that's going to determine the depth of the cut. And then it's also going to be the position of my fence, and that's going to determine the length of the cut. And I'm just going to point out here, you'll notice I am not using that block that I had from before, and that's because that's really only necessary when we're doing through cuts and we're actually producing a piece of wood that's actually between the blade and the fence. For this type of thing, we're not doing a through cut, so using a block just isn't needed for this type of operation. And so just to make things simple, we're just going to start with the blade height. Now my boards here are 1 1/2 inch thick, and so that means I want my blade height to be 3/4 of an inch. And so I'm going to start out getting that height by using my adjustable square here. I've got this set to 3/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to go ahead and get that set as best as I can by eye. I'm going to make sure that I'm actually a little bit under, maybe right about there. I want to make sure that my blade is actually under that 3/4 of an inch for my test cut. So because that's really the way I want to get this really dialed in, is through doing some test cuts on some of my offcuts here. This is just some other pieces of 2x4 that I had left over, and so I'm going to be doing test cuts on these pieces to make sure that I get everything set up just right. And so I'm just going to go ahead and set my fence just like maybe 1/4 of an inch away from the blade and start making some test cuts.
All right, and so here I'm getting my blade height set up. And so I'm just making a couple of cuts into my scrap pieces there. And then I'll take those pieces and see how everything lines up. I want my 2 faces to be nice and flush and coplanar. And so then I'll just go and raise my blade up a little bit and make some more cuts and see how that looks. And just keep repeating that process until you get everything nice and dialed. And if you end up cutting too much, well, it's no big deal. Then you just go and you lower your blade and flip your boards around and start over.
Okay, these test pieces are looking really good. When I put them together, I've got a nice flush seam here and both sides. So I've got my depth of cut set, my blade height set. Now I need to get my fence set. And one of the ways that I like to do that really fast is just to get it set so that the outside edge of this board is just going just past the edge of my blade here, just like that. And so I know if I come in here just even a little bit more, so I'm cutting I want to make sure I cut short just a little bit so that I can actually just creep on the cut and get that set just perfect. Alright, so now my length of cut is set as well. I'm sitting really nice and flush along this board. You only need to cut one piece for this test. And so my saw is all set up. So now we just got to start making some cuts. I'm going to cut the tops of all of my legs, and then I'm going to cut both sides of all my stretchers. Let's get to it. So these cuts are looking really, really good. Our joints are fitting together really nicely. These stretchers coming into the top of my legs. I got nice tight seams all the way around, and I'm really happy with this fit. And so now I just need to cut a lower section here for my lower stretchers. And so I've gone ahead and placed out some lines here. I'm coming up 9 inches from the bottom here. And so I've plotted out the lines of where I want my cut to be. And I've also transferred that over to the edge that I can actually see. And so this here is the section that I need to notch out. Got some shopmates working downstairs right now. And so I've got my fence set here. I've got it set so that I'm gonna get this first line here. My line that's closest to my fence here is the first cut that I want to make. Yeah, let's make that cut and see how it looks. So that was perfect. I've got it right on the line where I wanted it to be. And so now I'm gonna leave everything set just the way it is, and I'm gonna go ahead and make the same cut on my remaining 3 legs. Just make sure you get the orientation of your board right. I got my cut side face down on my top here, and it's going to be facing away from the fence. And I'm just going to make the same cut on the other 3 legs. All right, so I've got this initial cut made into all 4 legs, and so now what I want to do is I want to get the rest of this cut out here. And so what I've got right now is I've got my fence set up so that I'm coming up almost to my line here on this outside edge of my blade. I'm not quite up to that line. I'm probably shy of the line, maybe about a 1/16 of an inch or so right now, and that's what I want it to be. I do not want to overshoot this because this is not a test piece. This is my actual leg. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hog out this material here with a series of cuts, and then see how that fits and adjust from there. Okay, so I've got a nice snug fit here. It's just a perfect fit in here with really no play or wiggle room in there. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. So now I'm just going to repeat the same process on the last 3 legs. And then we can get this thing glued up. All right. All right, this thing is looking really, really good. I've got my lower stretcher nice and snug in there. And then my top is just fitting really nicely in here. And so now it's time to get some glue into here. What I like to do is after I glue them up, I'm actually going to drive some 1 1/4 inch brad nails in here, and that's going to hold everything nice and square and flush while I clamp it up and let the glue dry. It's not something you absolutely have to do, but if you have a brad nailer, that's what I would recommend you do. All right, let's get to it.
All right, and now it's glue up time. And so I'm just using some Tite Bond 1 here that I like to squirt right into the joints. And then I've also got some in this little paper cup. And then I'm getting everything spread out real nice with this disposable acid brush. And I really want to make sure that I get glue into all the joining faces. And so I'm getting into the main face of the cut there, but then also up into the shoulders. And basically everywhere where these boards are going to be coming into contact, you want there to be glue in between there. And so that's what gets us a really nice, strong joint that's going to be super durable. And so there we go. And now I'm going to check that everything's nice and square using my fancy hunk of red aluminum. And now I'm going to drive in some 1 1/4 brad nails. I'm going to put 4 into each joint, 1 into all 4 corners there. And that's going to help keep things nice and steady. It's also going to allow me to take this thing off of my table after I get it clamped up and work on other pieces so that I can move this thing and have things stay nice and stable. And lastly, I'm going to throw some clamps onto here. I do like to clamp these joints up. It really helps close up any gaps that I might have in there, as evidenced by the glue squeeze out you're seeing there. It's showing me that, well, for one, it's telling me that I used plenty of glue, but it's also telling me that I'm closing up those gaps. And that's really something that you want here for a nice, strong joint. And so I'm just going to get these clamps nice and tight. And then I'm going to clean up my glue squeeze out with a little paper towel. And I'm just going to call it good.
All right, so this thing is glued and clamped. And so there's really nothing left to do now but glue up the other one and let that glue dry. So that's what I'm going to do. And I will see you tomorrow. All right, it is the next day. My glue is dry and these things look great and they are super solid. One thing I'm just going to point out real fast is that if some of your joints aren't quite as flush in some places as the others, that is totally to be expected. We did not flatten these boards. We did not even plane them. So a little bit of variation is to be expected. So now we need to connect these two halves with another set of stretchers. Now there are numerous ways this could be done. You could actually use half laps all the way around. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be doing this next step using 3-inch wood screws. I've built several of these like this and they've all been super solid. Now I have 4 more stretchers here that are 18.5 inches long. I want this stand to be 21.5 inches wide, and I have subtracted 3 inches for the thickness of my legs. All right, I am going to start by attaching my upper stretchers, and I'm going to do that with my stand upside down on a nice flat surface. Depending on the size of the stand or table that you're building, you might not be able to do this, so you might need an extra set of hands to help you out. And so what I like to do is I like to get everything nice and flush in here. I like to get everything as straight and as even as I can get it, just kind of by feel and by eye. And then what I like to do is I'm going to drive a couple of 2-inch brad nails into here. You don't really need to use the brad nailer, but I like using it because it's going to hold my board exactly the way I want it while I drive in the wood screws. And so I'm going to be using a 3-inch wood screw. I really like these with the flat pan head top. These just have a lot of really great holding power. And I will also be drilling a pilot hole, as I just always like drilling pilot holes even when I'm using wood screws. And so I'm just going to drill in right here. All right. All right, and so I'm going to put another one in here. So I'm going to have 2 at each joint, and then I'm going to do that all the way around, and we'll see how it looks. All right, my upper stretchers are all secured with wood screws, and now I'm going to install these lowers. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually squeezing my legs together with a clamp, and hopefully you can see on here I've got a pencil line right in here. It's 1.5 inches from the bottom. I want these lower stretchers fairly close to the bottom, and so I've got a pencil line in there that's well, it's 1.25 inches from the bottom of my leg. And so now all I gotta do is I'm gonna come in here with a hammer and just kind of tap it right up to that line and get everything nice and straight and flush. And just do the same thing. I'm going to drive some more brad nails and more screws. All right, all my stretchers are in. This thing is looking great. It is super sturdy and even no rocking. So I'm really happy with the way this thing's turned out. The only thing left to do is put the top on. I'm going to be making mine out of 3/4 inch plywood, and I'm just going to be cutting that at my table saw. All right, this thing is done. I've secured my plywood top on here using 1.5 inch wood screws. I've gone 3 per side. You might want to do more depending on the dimensions of your piece. I also put a 1/4 inch radius roundover on here using my router table. Of course, that could also be done with a handheld router. And make sure you go check out the video that Dave made if you need any tips on how to do that. And you can also see how I've driven 2 screws per side for each of my stretchers. So I sized this stool based on the dimensions of this seat cushion. And so there's really only one thing left to do. That's good sitting. Hey, thanks for watching. I really hope this video helped you on your woodworking journey. So make sure you click like and subscribe and all that sort of thing. And if you want to see more of what I'm doing, you can find me at jmawoodstudio.com. See you around.